Welcome to the Building Centre. I'm Matt Leach. I'm Chief Exec of the Built Environment Trust, which is the organisation that owns and enables the Building Centre to deliver its work. For those of you who are new to this building, welcome. As I was explaining to Matt, one of our keynote speakers today, this is a building with a rich history, deeply rooted in the built environment. For the last 95 years, 75 of them in this building, the Building Centre has been the centre of the UK built environment, providing a home and a hub for the leadership bodies, key leadership bodies in the industry, from the Construction Products Association through the UK Green Building Council, Build UK, and many others. We acted for much of the start of our life, in fact through to the 1990s, as the Brick Library of Britain. So for some of you, I'm not sure, there aren't many in this audience, I think, who are old enough to remember that, but also, somebody's nodding there. You could come to this building and pretty much see, in the days of finite construction materials, everything that you could build a home out of. And we had hordes of clerks who would run up and down stairs to find data sheets on bricks or tiles or pipes or anything else you needed, because in the days before the internet, this was the centre of information for building stuff. And we've tried to, since then, reimagine and reinterpret, reinvent that role, seeing ourselves now not just as a place where people come to fetch information, but a place where people can come together to share knowledge and learning. And that's why we're so delighted to welcome you all here for the latest of our Water Wednesdays. I'd like, as part of the exhibition on water and event series on water resilience, which kicked off at the start of the year and will continue into April. And I'd like, first of all, to thank all of the sponsors of the exhibition and the event series who've enabled this to take place. I'm deeply grateful to all of you. The Built Environment Trust and the Building Centre is a charity. We aim to just about cover our costs through rent, through sponsorship, through wider engagement, and we can only do events like this through the generous contribution of the many sponsors of this series. Now, we've got a busy agenda and we're running about 10 minutes late, so I'm going to run through this fast, but we have got a fantastic agenda today, like on all of our Water Wednesdays. We've got some brilliant speakers, including Matt Wheeldon from Wessex Water, Kevin Barton from Robert Bray Associates, Stuart Edwards from United Utilities, Rebecca Radford from Anglian Water, Sue Illman from Illman Young Landscape Design, Alastair Chisholm from CIWEM, and Alex Nixon from Thames Water. Thanks to all of you for coming and contributing, and to the rest of you for coming to participate in what's going to be a fantastic afternoon. The format is going to be 3 presentations, a short break with refreshments outside, and then we'll be finishing with a bit of a panel discussion. Now, before I hand over to our first speaker, there are, as ever, a few bits of housekeeping. The first is that there is not a fire drill planned for today. If the alarm goes off, please head to the nearest fire escapes. They're mostly out there. Staff are on hand and will lead you out of the building. In terms of the way the day is arranged, we hope this is going to be interactive. The Building Centre will be here and acting as a place of collaboration and sharing of views. So there'll be an opportunity after each session to ask questions of the speakers. So please do wait to the end of each session to take part in that discussion and ask your questions. I'm going to stop now because we need to get on to the meat of the session. So I'm delighted now and incredibly pleased to welcome our first speaker of the day, Matt Wheeldon, who's Director of Infrastructure Development at Wessex Water. From one Matt to another,
suffering from the same condition at the moment. It's called postprandial somnambulance. All it means is you've had a really nice lunch and all your blood is now around this part of your body doing its stuff. And I want to get your blood from here to here. So my job is to stir you up and to wind you up. And I'm going to talk to you about 3 problems and 2 ways in which you and all of you can solve these problems. First problem is our climate is changing rapidly. The second problem is we're trying to tackle that problem by looking in the wrong places for the solutions. And the third problem is no one's got a clue what we're talking about. Let's get into the detail. So, temperature on the left, rainfall on the right. Our temperature is getting warmer. The consequence of warmer temperatures is more water overall. Right, so this is our summer metrics for increase in temperature. Now in the summer, we're not seeing in total more rainfall. What we're seeing is wilder rainfall. Okay, so actual levels of rainfall, if measured over the whole of the summer. And what that hides is the big thunderstorms that are causing the numbers in there. Okay, so we're getting warmer and wilder summers. If you look at the winters, warmer winters, wetter winters. And if you take those summer, spring, winter, and autumn numbers together and you look at the whole year, you're getting warmer years and you're getting more rainfall. This is called the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship. Very simple law of thermodynamics. The warmer the atmosphere, the more moisture it holds. Okay, and that is exactly what we are seeing. So, we are adding to the problem because when we build properties, we build in permeable area. Who wants to live in a permeable roofed house? No one. And so, historically, we've been building at about that rate, and going forwards, we've got to build, apparently, at that rate to meet 1.5 million new homes. Anyone to bet if we're going to get there? No, we're not. Okay, fine. Good, that was easy. But less rain reaching the ground is going to exacerbate the problems. Here's the weird thing. We're running out of water, apparently. According to our water resources management planning, by 2055, we'll be about 5,000 megalitres a day short. How much do we currently put into water supply? About 12,500 megalitres a day. Why is it short? Well, we're getting these longer, drier summers. Abstraction licenses are being cut to try and protect the environment, and demand is going up. So, that's a bit weird, because the UK is actually quite wet overall. Overall, we give our customers about 1.6% of the rain that lands on our country. Okay. So we're running out of water, and yet we're only using a tiny, tiny fraction of that water. There's something not right here. I'm going to tell you some really crazy stats now. You've probably never heard of a teralitre. A teralitre is 1 trillion litres. That's 1 trillion kilograms. That is 1 cubic kilometre of water. Okay, try and get your head around a cubic kilometre of water. So 2024, 2025, water companies provided 4.6 cubic kilometres of water to their customers. That's a lot of water. But that water hasn't just rolled to the customers, it's been pumped to the customers. To the extent where we have had to pump it, on average, 100 metres in the air to get to our customers. Now, 100 metres times 1 trillion kilograms, you're not going to be able to get your head around what that number means. So I'm going to bring it back down to you as an individual. Every day, the amount of energy we have to put in getting water to your tap is the equivalent of you lifting a bag of sugar, 1 kilogram weight, twice the height of Mount Everest. That is how much energy your water company puts into every single person every single day, getting 1 kilogram, 18,000 meters in the air, so that you can spend a quarter of it filling your toilet cistern with it. That is totally stupid, and it's not your fault. That is the way your house is built. And if you think that's crazy, that's 1.2 cubic kilometers of drinking water lifted 100 meters in the air so you can flush your poo with it, if you think that is crazy, it gets worse. Because that total 4.6 teraliters of water comes back to us for treatment because you guys have polluted it. Okay? But that's not all that comes back to us. Because you're adding rain. Thanks very much. So our wastewater treatment works are treating between 50 and 80% more liquid than we are giving our customers. And we know, actually, what is giving to us is a lot more than that. Hence, we have the problem with storm overflows. Well, that's needless. That's pointless. And the energy that has to go into that is colossal, because not only do we have to lift sewage multiple times, but also we have to treat it. And that requires energy and chemicals. A lot of our chemicals are driven by volume. So if it's a coagulant like ferric sulfate, the more liquid that arrives, because we are treating all this rain, the more chemicals we have to pour in. We're not focused on the problem, because the problem is here. Our homes. We are in the Built Environment Centre. This is what we talk about. We talk about homes. The problem is we're filling toilets with drinking water, and then our toilets are connected to our downpipes. About half of the properties in England are built like this. How do we tackle this problem? We try and fix it there. We try and fix it by building bigger reservoirs and by building bigger storage tanks for stormwater. And all that means is we end up storing, treating, and pumping more drinking water so that we can fill our toilet systems with it, and then storing, pumping, and treating more rainwater so that we can discharge it back to the environment because it's been contaminated with sewage. We're not focused on the problem. And we're stuck in this doom loop of a rapidly changing climate where we're adding more impermeable areas, where the centralized solutions we're building have a very high carbon footprint, which is leading to a rapidly changing climate. This is miserable, isn't it? I'm sorry to depress you. There will be good news. Don't worry. Right. My third point was, no one's got a clue what we're talking about. The number of times I speak to people about what I do, and I use often water company industry terminology, and they look through you because they don't know what you're talking about. Right. How do we tackle all three of these issues? A changing climate, people that don't know what we're talking about, and a lack of focus. Well, here it is, 6 words. This is it. This is the peak of my talk, okay? These next 6 words are the peak, because this is what I want you to go home with. How do we do it? So it's very, very simple, overly simple, but it's this. We need to manage rain better where it lands. Right, let's talk about that. What does that mean? Managing rain better where it lands is basically about following simple source control principles. We all understand what source control principles are. And the source control principles are very simple. Rain's a resource, no whatever Sherlock. Okay, we should be capturing it locally and using it where possible, not reusing it, because no one's used it first. We talk about rainwater reuse. No, it's rainwater use, because it's not being used in the first place. And then we should be returning it back to the environment as close as possible to where it landed. Sounds obvious, and we're going to talk about SuDS in a second. Sometimes we get that wrong. Let's apply this to what drives me mad, which is storm overflows, and we can solve storm overflows in 4 different areas. What I'm going to do is just show you how we currently solve storm overflows and how we could solve storm overflows, and I'm going to go from bad to better. Okay, so we're going to start with number 4, attenuation. Attenuation, high embodied carbon, high operational carbon, because of all the pumping, all the extra chemicals. Often there isn't space to build this kind of stuff in cities. No biodiversity benefits. It doesn't help with our water resources, and customers' bills go up. Okay, not a great solution, but it's what we're doing. Increasing flow to full treatment. This is our largest works at Wessex Water. This is Avonmouth. Currently treats 3.5 tonnes a second. If we were just treating sewage, we'd be treating 1.3 tonnes a second, because there's only 850,000 people upstream of here. But we're treating 3.5. That's not enough. We're adding an extra 2 tons a second. This will enable us to treat 5.5 tons a second. If that was sewage, Bristol would be the same size as London. It's not. Why? We're treating more rain. How stupid is that? So that's not a good solution either. Lots of concrete, lots of chemicals, lots of energy, no value-added benefits. Storm overflows, intermittent. Discharges, well, how about treating the discharges? Well, if you're worried about public health, you can go and zap those bacteria. Lots of energy, no environmental benefit. That is one option, not a great option. Lots of carbon, lots of energy, and doesn't really tackle the whole environmental problem if you think there is one. Reed beds, constructed wetlands, etc., great, especially where the overflow is incredibly dilute, as it is in groundwater, high groundwater table areas like it is in a lot of Wessex. This is one of our treatment works called Wheeldon. In 2023, it discharged for 70% of the year. What was coming out was cleaner than the treated sewage was required to be. Okay, that's how dilute it is. And this is just kind of polishing it. So let's get on to the real good solutions. Okay, communal SuDS, 1B. This is at Congresbury. It's a SuDS that's been adopted by Wessex Water. So great, good, and I'm all pro SuDS. But when you look at it, it's down here in this development. It's collecting all the rain that lands on those new properties, and it's a lovely feature with lots of biodiversity. But there's a big problem with SuDS, and it's a big problem that everyone is now talking about, is ownership, operation, maintenance. And there's 2 consultations out at the moment from both DEFRA and MHCLG about how we tackle the whole problem of maintenance of SuDS and who maintains them. But what this is lacking is the fact that rain is first and foremost a resource. And whilst it is a resource being used for the biodiversity benefits, the people contributing to it are not benefiting from that resource side of rain. And so I want to come to property level SuDS, where we see the rain that lands on our roof as a resource that we can reuse. Now, that might only be garden reuse because internal plumbing is pretty expensive, but you could easily do that for new build. And then getting rid of the surplus into your gardens. The 2 right-hand pictures are my home. So that's my... Yes, it's a bit of a mess, sorry, but this is work in progress. There's a cubic meter capture there. And what's really important with a water butt is what happens when it is full. That's what's really important. So you can see here the overflow to my water butt, which just goes around the garden. There's nothing underground. It literally goes into my petunias. The front of the house, I've just redone the driveway and put it straight into a soakaway. So there's no sudsy kind of biodiversity or other benefits from that, but at least it's not going into the combined sewer that runs around the back of my house anymore. So when you compare these options, property level SuDS stand head and shoulders above others. Communal level SuDS and nature-based treatment solutions are good, but they're not at the top of the tree. Here's a crazy thing. If we flushed all of our toilets in the whole of the nation with drinking water, we could reduce drinking water consumption by about 3,000 megalitres a day. Compare that to the 5,000 megalitres a day that we reckon we're going to be short of. Now, obviously, retrofitting every property like that is a tall order. But let's start with things that aren't built yet. Right, I'm going to finish with 2 things that we can all do. Okay, these are really simple things, and I'd like you all to try and commit to do these. 1, let's use a common narrative. Okay? It's a narrative that is catching. Other people are saying it. If we all say it as people who are involved in water management, managing rain better where it lands or managing rain better where it falls, it's kind of the same thing, we will make progress. We will make progress. We are making progress. This is the Water Minister a month ago talking about it. After this meeting, I'm going to the City Water debate. The chair of the EA, Alan Lovell, phoned up my chief exec, Ruth Jefferson, 2 days ago. And he said, I've been listening to this Matt Wheeldon guy. I want to talk tonight about rainwater management. Ruth Jefferson, my chief exec, said, no, I'm talking about rainwater management tonight. I said, why don't both of you talk about rainwater management tonight? So it's getting through. It's a message that's getting through to the top now. What do we mean by rainwater management? We mean recognizing it's a resource and then getting rid of the surplus locally. So that's the first thing, common narrative. The second thing I'm going to leave you with is campaigning for source control principles. These are the 2 principles. We've already mentioned those. So what are these? What could we do? Well, here's a long list. And I'm not going to go into the detail because I haven't got time, but hey, let's capture the rain that lands on our roof and reuse it. Enough rain lands on an average roof throughout the year to supply all of that home's non-potable demands if we had the infrastructure. Now, it wouldn't solve all the problems, but it would solve a heck of a lot of them. Let's mandate SuDS for new build. How many times have we been saying this? Let's do it. Let's give water companies powers to go and fix properties where we could take the rain off the combined sewer rather than building these horrible big concrete storage tanks. Let's give water companies powers to get rid of the rain to water courses. That's a bit of an odd one. Let's get involved with highways and get them to recognize that draining a highway into a combined sewer is a bad idea and they should be paying for it rather than having it for free. Then there would be an incentive to get it out and treat it and get it back to the environment. Right, too much detail. Let me give you some encouragement. Things are happening. The national SuDS standards released last July have caught this idea of it's a resource. So number 1 in the hierarchy is no longer drain it to ground, it's capture it for reuse. Brilliant. They've got it. Well done, DEFRA. Here's the problem. It's not statutory guidance, okay? So you can look at it and go, yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, that doesn't make my development viable, I reckon. So I'll just ignore it. Okay, so good opportunity there. Rainwater Management Platform, I'm speaking more about this next Tuesday here, but very briefly, it's taking the Bible of drainage and converting it into something modern, new, free to access, and also emphasizing the need to use rain as a resource. So that's work that we're doing with a whole number of organizations along the bottom there. It's a £2 million Ofwat innovation-funded project. It's very exciting, and I'm leading that as a lead sponsor, so that's really great. This is very exciting as well. So here's the big exam question. We've got to demonstrate the evidence to what is the evidence that managing rain better where it lands for both new and retrofitting development is better economically for society and the environment than centralized solutions. Okay, lots of work has been done in this space under enabling water smart communities and various other projects. This is trying to bring it all together into a really simple message that gives DEFRA and MHCLG the evidence they need to focus on decentralized solutions and to make it happen. And then something coming up in October. We're gathering the world's greats in rainwater management, and hopefully the UK can go and learn some lessons from people who are well ahead of us on their journey of their relationship with rain. Right, my last slide, I always leave to Janet and John because this is such a simple message. So Janet and John summarize everything I say really, really simple. Here's Janet and John on rainwater management. My goodness me, John, we've sorted water scarcity and storm overflows and reduced our carbon footprint. Ah, Janet, that's because you and me have become so much better at managing rain where it lands. Thank you very much. Questions? Any questions? I hope you're awake.
Pop your hands up.
Kevin.
Do you see opportunities of similar thinking of source and decentralization for blackwater as well as rainwater?
Yes. It's not something I'm focused on because I'm always into hierarchy. What is the most obvious? And cleaning rainwater is a lot easier than cleaning blackwater. So if you run out all the options above you, you end up down there. So DEFRA said to me recently, just before Christmas, they said, Matt, we agree with you. How can we do it? And I said, well, you start with the easy stuff, surely. You start with the homes that are not yet built. You don't try and start with the things that are more difficult, like retrofitting. So it's about hierarchy. And we had that hierarchy there for the national SuDS standards. We should be following hierarchies. And communal SuDS are great, but have you tried property level SuDS first? So it's about hierarchy. If you can't do property level SuDS, then you move to community level SuDS. And if you can't do rainwater harvesting, okay, let's talk about grey water. Let's talk about black water. So obviously it gets more difficult as it gets dirtier, but yes, there's a place. Of course there's a place. So it's about hierarchy. And if we're not tackling the easy stuff first, let's not necessarily shout as loudly about the more difficult stuff as much as we're shouting about the easy stuff. So hierarchy.
Thank you. I am awake. I'm really concerned about the amount of water that data centres are using, and they're growing. Are you concerned?
Yes and no. It depends what sort of water. If they're using drinking water to cool machines, I think that's daft. That's not necessary. Don't forget, there's plenty of water. It's where it is and how we capture it. We're not using a huge amount of water compared to how much it rains. So it's all about, so I'm not worried in that respect. There's loads of water around. We're just rubbish at capturing it. Why do we rely on a few organisations to capture something that lands on everyone? I mean, the amount of land that water companies use to collect the water to supply these data centres is tiny compared to the amount of land where all the rain is landing. So we've just got to think about decentralised solutions and go, yeah, okay, rain data centre, yeah, you can go there. But don't you dare use high-quality drinking water. You know, we're putting in plant now for our drinking water to remove PFAS. The energy that goes into this drinking water is going up and up and up as we tackle ubiquitous pollutants. How dare you cool your machines with this high-quality drinking water? It should be outrageous. We should be outraged over that. There's plenty of other water. We've just got to be more clever about how we harness it. So yes and no.
I live in Hillingdon, and there are a lot of data centres in our area. They're already there, and they're already using the drinking water. And I understand they have priority over ordinary users in the event of the water running out.
Gosh, they shouldn't do.
They
in
have.
that, water companies' priority is domestic customers over business. You can switch a business off. You can't switch a customer off. So I would struggle to believe that's true. Obviously, I don't know your local situation, but my understanding is that actually we have a duty to provide the public before commercial businesses. Anyway, Alice, is that true?
I think they've been designated as critical national infrastructure.
Right. Well, how about priority if push came to shove? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Alastair knows far more about that than I do.
Thank you. Excellent talk. You talked a lot about there's lots of water, and we get it. But there is this dilemma, isn't it, that we also have periods of drought and we have water. So can you talk a little bit more about that aspect of what you're talking about? Because it's a constant questions that seems to, it seems counterintuitive.
It is.
And how are they related?
Yes. So here's a question for you. Where does it rain? Everywhere. Okay. How much does it rain? Varies, but between 500 mil and 1,200 mil. Okay, so up to 1.3 meters deep. You multiply that by how much water we use, and there is shed loads of water. Clearly, we don't capture it very effectively. So what a decentralized solution approach does is it expands the area of capture. Every roof is a resource capture center. You know, in our mentality, when you look at the National Planning Policy Framework, the current one, not the one that's being revised, it talks about using natural resources prudently. Paragraph 8C, go and read it. And then it goes on to talking about capturing the sunlight and turning it into energy, decentralized energy production. It does not mention the rain that lands on exactly the same location on every roof. That is what we need to counter. We need to challenge. We need to move forward to say it's not just photons that are a natural resource, but it's raindrops too. So if we can expand the area of where we're capturing the rain, we are going to inevitably make our properties more resilient to a changing climate, to attacks on centralized solutions. If you're a terrorist Okay, you're not going to attack a property, you're going to attack a reservoir. You're not going to attack a PV panel on someone's roof, you're going to attack the interconnector that comes in from France. Yeah? So we need to make sure that our properties are more resilient to a changing climate and to a changing world situation, as we all know about, by making properties themselves more resilient to the utility services they need. And there's plenty of natural resources that we are not currently capturing and could be. We've got an opportunity to build 1.5 million homes and not fill every single toilet cistern in those homes with drinking water. Okay, we've got that opportunity. We're not doing that. We are going to be filling those toilet cisterns with drinking water at the moment. That, there's a technical term for that, stupid. Okay, that's the technical term for that. We can change that. Common narrative, lobby for source control solutions, make a difference. Okay, thank you very much.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me today. Is it possible to switch the front lights off? Why not? It's nicer images. So I'm Kevin Barton, Managing Director of Robert Bray Associates. We're a firm of landscape architects that have been specialising in managing rain in the landscapes we design, the other way, since the mid-90s, since the kind of whole SuDS thing came across from the US. We're in a bit of a desperate state. I mean, this has been around since the mid-90s, but arguably we've gone backwards quite a long way from when the idea came to the UK in the mid-90s. And I'm going to show a few examples of kind of like, bad SuDS, some of the sort of stuff that sort of Matt showed. And then I'm going to do a couple of case studies of housing schemes that use a more integrated approach and, I guess, water-sensitive, spongy approach to managing rainwater in the development. And it requires a really fundamental mind shift, and we don't like what we call the D word. As Matt said, it's not great to go and talk to the public and include the word drainage. It puts people off. It puts other disciplines off. I remember in the mid-90s, I was really put off with the idea of sustainable, as it was called, sustainable urban drainage systems. It had the D word in. Why would I, as a kind of creative landscape architect, be interested in drainage? Little did I know, years later, I would be kind of doing that in every project I work on. So it's important we don't think of it as drainage, as sort of Matt said. And it requires a massive mind shift. We think of it as a disruptive technology. These new way, been around for nearly 30 years, but this kind of newer way of managing rainwater, as opposed to how the Victorians did it, is a disruptive technology. It's so totally different from conventional drainage that we should discard the D word and really emphasize the fact that you kind of need to take the top of your head off, turn your brain around, and kind of plug it back in again to be able to design in these ways. So there's a few things very similar to what Matt said that are kind of fundamental in how we approach the sort of management of rainwater in new development. As Matt said, think of it as an opportunity. It's not a problem to be solved anymore like the Victorians treated it. We understand why, but it's not a problem, it's an opportunity. Rain is an opportunity, it is a resource. We need to distribute its management throughout the development, not the kind of end of pipe, the hole at the bottom of the site, which I'm going to show you a few examples of. We need to distribute that management of water, as Matt said, at property, throughout the landscape, throughout the development, not creating new space for the management of rainwater, but using the fabric of development that we were going to put in anyway. Hard surfaces, roofs, green spaces, we're going to put those in development. We can make them manage water just by kind of tweaking a few materials and sort of format of them. Starting where rain lands, really, really fundamental, this idea of source control. Ideally, where rain lands, we start managing, or as close to where it lands, we start managing it through things like permeable surfaces, rainwater harvesting, green infrastructure or blue-green infrastructure. And then really, really important in terms of unlocking genuinely multifunctional landscapes and places for people and water and wildlife is to understand the rainfall hierarchy. That all of these big holes I'm going to show you in a minute, they're sat. It doesn't feel like it, but in the UK, most of the time, it's not raining. All of those SuDS systems are just waiting to be functional. So these pipe-to-pond solutions, they're not doing anything the vast majority of the time. And when it does rain, the vast majority of rainfall events are actually quite small. They're not the 1 in 100 climate change, 85 mil as it would be in London, well, 120 odd mil, but 85 mil of storage. They're nowhere near that. So even when it does rain, most of the time they just fill up a little bit with water, making them muddy and unusable. So we need to respond to the difference between most of the time it's not raining, most of the time when it does rain, there's small rainfall events. Occasionally we have these extreme rainfall events, and we need to manage those different conditions differently through our sort of SuDS management training. Keep that water flow in the landscape as much as possible. Then we can use it as a resource. We can naturally irrigate our landscape. We can create better places for people, cooler environments to help us literally survive the kind of the hot summers we're getting, which kill thousands of people a year. So keep that water flow in the landscape. We can create biodiversity features as well. And then use a landscape-led approach. Not this, which is sadly still 95+% of what's going through planning. Hopefully the new standards, national standards that came out last year, give a little bit more teeth to the planning system to demand more, but it requires people understanding how to ask for better. But this is still the kind of prevalent approach, what we call the end-of-pipe approach. Collect everything conventionally, modify conventional drainage to meet these new requirements of storing water, focusing on just this extreme rainfall event, creating these dangerous features within public landscapes. This actually went through planning as one of 2 public open spaces, designated planning requirement. A certain area per capita of person living in the development needs a certain amount of green space. This went through planning as that green space. Shortly after, here's the other one, the other green space surrounded by housing. This is me holding the camera up above my head. Danger, keep out of your designated public open space. Because soon after it opened, they realized it was too dangerous to let people in there. Kids can't play in there. Now it's just totally overgrown and forgotten about. This is not acceptable. The idea of putting a knee rail around a green space in development land is really, really valuable. We shouldn't be sterilizing it just for this one functionality, managing extreme rainfall events if they happen to come along. This, is dry and dead in the summer, wet and boggy and unusable the rest of the time. It is not a space for people. No one's going to go down there and use that. That is not a valuable amenity space. That's what we call a crime against landscape. Similarly, there's a lovely kind of big green space in the heart of this housing scheme, and then just kind of got this crater plonked in the middle of it with these kind of concrete head walls. It is not a valuable space for local people or even wildlife. This kind of even worse, you can see the kind of bogginess. There's a bit of wildlife opportunity here, but this is conventional pipe drainage, so all the pollutants are coming in here, so it's actually not that great for wildlife because we've got hydrocarbons, heavy metals, toxic microplastics in there. And to kind of cap it off, we've got so many pictures of kids climbing these things. The last thing you should do, well, A, you shouldn't do big concrete head walls like this. Anyway, the last thing you should do is take a sort of 1 meter high concrete head wall, add another 1.2 meters to it with basically a climbing frame of horizontal bars, and then think that's acceptable to put in a public open space in the heart of a housing area. I've seen so many kids playing on these. It's a couple of meters down to hard concrete. It's just not acceptable. Or what we're starting to see is kind of this greenwash, a horrible, horrible kind of crater-type end-of-pipe system. The pipe's so deep that they had to kind of dig an extra sumpy bit in the middle with these vertical gabion walls, and then fence it off to public and wildlife access, apart from things that can fly or get through the gaps, and then cynically go, oh, it's RSPB approved, it's got this kind of bird-friendly planting in there, that's cool, that's biodiversity. Nature on your doorstep, but you can't go in it, and actually, any hedgehogs and things that get in there, they're probably going to end up in there and die. Just dressing it up as BNG is not the answer either, and I think we're going to see more of that as sort of the pressure of BNG unfolds. So here's one project from about 2004. It's a co-housing project, and it demonstrates this idea of a sort of hierarchy of rainfall and distributing rainwater management across a site. So it's taking here the sort of the parking, the vehicular access area runoff, taking it through permeable paving at the top of a very steeply sloping site. That manages most rainfall events and removes the pollution from that water. Critically, the water has been cleaned through that permeable paving, and now it's a resource that we can allow people and wildlife to have contact with. So it falls down in a very visible way down this big retaining wall, creating a spectacle when it rains, drops down onto a sort of a little erosion pad at the bottom there, and this is a swale in someone's garden. That's it more recently. It's still there, it's still functioning. It's just someone's amazingly lush garden. That then turns a corner and drops into this wildlife pond in the heart of the development, which also takes runoff from the co-housing roof. We've got a pedestrian street here, which has a little rill running down along the side of it, which is also picking up roof runoff directly along little channels. Each rainwater pipe from the building drops into that little rill. That runs down the site. Here you can see an example of it there, where there's storage underneath the kind of pavement there. And critically, all of that infrastructure manages all of the runoff from all the hard surfaces up to about the 1 in 10 rainfall event. So that is that's 90, probably 98, 99% of rainfall events are contained within all of that infrastructure. So all the day-to-day rainfall up to pretty extreme rainfall events are all managed there. And then this feature on the right here is the extreme event basin. But it is the only kind of communal green space on that site. And so we've preserved it from getting wet. Only in rainfall events bigger than a 1 in 10 will this receive water, and only stored to a maximum of 450 mil deep. We never store water more than 450 mil deep. Typically, probably the average in the UK is about 2 to 2.5 meter depth water storage in basins. Our working maximum is a foot, 300 mil, occasionally 450 mil. We make sure that these spaces don't get wet every time it rains by having these source control features managing and cleaning day-to-day runoff, protecting this space, and only coming into play in the kind of events where people aren't going to be wanting to go out and play. And then it'll drain away within a few hours and be usable again. Similarly, a more recent project in Colchester, again, integrating it into the fabric of development, asking every part of the development, can we modify you, that surface that rain lands on, can we modify you to manage rain more sustainably, more kind of productively, more multifunctionally? So here we turned a green roof into a blue-green roof, and that took a whole chunk of rainfall. If that was flat, we tried to get it flat. Had already gone through planning with a bit of a pitch on it. If it was flat, we would have managed the whole 1 in 100 plus climate change rainfall event right there where it landed. Lost a load of that volume, super critical in terms of flood reduction, is losing volume, not so much holding on to water and releasing it slowly. Far more significant is just taking the volume out altogether. Blue-green roofs are fantastic for that. And what that did is it took some of the pressure off the rest of the landscape, so the water comes down off those roofs. We're picking up hard surfaces now, the sort of vehicular and parking areas through our version of Grasscrete, and I suspect that is actually permeable. We've got rain gardens here, so the green infrastructure bits that we would have put in, we would have put planting and trees in there anyway. We've modified those to be able to store water in them. Again, maximum 300 mil deep. So they're managing some of the runoff from roofs and from the hard surfaces as well. And this sort of system then kind of drops down through the site. Here again, sort of another view of that sort of street. All the parking is permeable. That's removing the pollutants, so stopping it getting into the rest of the system, managing day-to-day rainfall. And then we have this renovated mill pond at the bottom of the sort of the management train, which is getting clean water in extreme rainfall events, topping that pond up. It is a huge mill pond. A proportion of it is given over to the residents as a swimming pond and kind of ornamental feature. The rest of it is all incredibly valuable habitat. And that then can store an extra 150 mil of water over the top of it in extreme rainfall events. But we've protected that from all the pollution and created there's no reason why we couldn't do this in ordinary housing estates. There's no reason we couldn't have swimming ponds. It's a very popular thing, outdoor swimming or just real swimming, as opposed to captive swimming. There's no reason we couldn't do that on just ordinary housing estates. Why not? You know, but we need this management train to make sure the pollution's removed. I just want to finish with, this is a SuDS basin and a retrofit scheme, so another huge opportunity beyond new development is retrofitting all the rest of the urban environment, which is kind of committing these water sins every day. And here's a retrofit project we did in White City in London, and this is a SuDS basin, which of course most of the time isn't functioning as SuDS, but what it is functioning as, I knew that would happen. Basically, it's a natural play feature, and that sound, and you can just make them out in the bottom there. There are just kids just playing through this chasing each other, creating games in a SuDS basin with all this sort of screaming and shouting. That's these SuDS basins, SuDS features, they can be genuinely, properly valuable, multifunctional kind of public assets, community assets. And yes, we need to be thinking along those lines. Thank you. I think hopefully we've got time for a question. Yeah. Any questions? I think there's a question. First hand up was over in the corner.
What do you think the reason is that we're not doing that in most, new development housing estates? Is it because it's not mandatory, or is it because it costs more, or what do you think are the biggest blockers for that happening?
I don't think it's because it's not mandatory. What I would be really love to know, I would like to go back 10 years and have a parallel universe where we have today's national standards, but we'd been applying them for the last 10 years. I think we'd be in a different place if we'd had stronger, and the original drafts of those national standards were a lot stronger. They'd got watered down through lobbying, shall we say. So it would be really interesting to look at where would the UK be now if we'd had those much stronger, much more comprehensive national standards for the last 10 years. It's very rare to find a scheme which hasn't done SuDS in it. It's effectively mandatory. There are very, very few examples where it's been overruled and basically the lead local flood authority's recommendation for approval on non-approval has been ignored by the planning authority. But of course it gives it a bit more power if it becomes mandatory. The question is then who looks after it and things like this. And I don't think necessarily that the SuDS the Welsh model is necessarily a game changer. I think there's lots of aspects to it. There's our obsession with modelling, obsession with the numbers. That's done a disservice to it being a creative multifunctional asset. We haven't put the same value on people and wildlife. We've put the value on the numbers. It's become a numbers game. It's become a very expensive specialist modelling exercise. And a lot of schemes, all those end-of-pipe schemes you see out there, are basically the approach is how do we change what we've always done the least amount to meet these new criteria. Those new criteria have been based around numbers, certain volumes of water, rainfall events, slowed down to certain flow rates. If you take the approach of how do we change what we've always done the least amount to meet that criteria, you end up with an end-of-pipe system. So there is a huge knowledge vacuum. That's one of the other biggest issues in the industry. Is it is an absolute game changer. All of those rules of the past of rainwater management, it's almost better to throw them out and start again. But that's very, very difficult for a profession in industry that's done things in certain ways for so long to basically say you've got to turn that tank around and head in the opposite direction and do things totally differently. Across the industry, it's very, very hard to get those minds to change. People don't like change. But we're in all of these emergencies. Somehow we need to radically shake it up and make it happen. And yeah, I could talk for hours on all the issues here. But yeah, we've got another question. I don't know. You choose who's next.
You used two technical terms. One was swale, which I think I know what it is. And then there was another thing you pointed to along the side of the road.
Rain garden?
No, rill. Okay, so could you...
paving.
No, rill.
Rill.
Guy
Did I point to a rill? Okay. Yeah,
so
yes, I did, yes. What was the first one? Swale.
Could you describe exactly the construction of them?
Yeah, a swale in its simplest form is basically a shallow depression in the landscape, like a linear shallow depression in the landscape. It's got a flat base of typically around 1 metre wide. It's kind of like a ditch, but shallower side slopes and a flat base. Ditch is steeper and doesn't have much of a base. And so it's a very simple, typically we'll do them like maybe 150 mil deep, but it's basically a conveyance feature for water to move through the landscape from one part of a SuDS system to another part of the SuDS system, cleaning it on its way, losing water into the ground. So it's simply landscape, so soil and planting. It can be amenity grass, it can be meadow grass, it can be planting sometimes if it's sort of more of a bioswale. We can have play features through it, balance beams, stepping stones, things like that. So yeah, it's a sort of simple depression in the landscape, as is most SuDS actually. Things like a rain garden is simply a planted area that happens to be a bit lower to be able to store water in it. Yeah. A rill is, like in the Alhambra and things, it's a kind of a channel that water can sort of pass along and you can see it. It hasn't got a grating over it. So it's a kind of visible feature that water passes along. We can plant those, or they can just be hard features. Again, it's for moving water from one part of a system to another in a sort of controlled manner. Yeah, thanks.
Hello, I'm an architect, and I'm just going to give an example of how difficult it is to sort of find solutions even when you want to find one. So this is an example. I was working on a residential, a single family house in London on 6 meters deep of clay soil on a heavily sloping site. What was immediately downslope of us was an enormous park that belonged to the council. And the trouble is, as soon as you collect any water, you're not allowed to discharge it over neighboring land, even a lovely park. And so I had in my design team, obviously I had an M&E engineer with a drainage engineer. I had an approved inspector who could think out of the box. I had a landscape architect who unfortunately was a trendy garden designer. And among all of those people, we could not come up with a solution, and we ended up having to pump the water into the rainwater sewer from the very bottom of the garden once it had come through the roof drainage. I find that outrageous, and I would love to know.
Was this an extension?
No, it was a large extension. Yeah.
So you could have put a blue-green roof on that, and you would have been higher than the sewer. You could have harvested.
It was sloping roof, though.
Taken it into the building.
Sorry?
That's probably the answer is not take it below the sewer. Sometimes we've had landlocked schemes where the whole site is lower than the sewer. Without pumping, we couldn't get back to the sewer.
Yeah.
Then we've had a conversation with the lead local flood authority and said, look, this is the situation. We either kind of pay an enormous amount to go over third-party land or pumping, which is not ideal because that can fail.
Yeah.
Can you relax the sort of conditions around things like half-empty times? So it just takes longer to infiltrate, and we've had success with that. So it's like it's sometimes about having sensible conversations, and there are sets of rules.
Yeah.
But sometimes, if there's a justifiable reason, you may be able to step outside of those rules, particularly on clay. So this project in Enfield, we couldn't reach. There's this particular technical requirement that if the system filled with a big rainfall event within 24 hours, half that capacity needs to be available again.
Yes.
You can't generally meet that on clay soils, but it's very rare that that's going to happen, so it's kind of far better that if you can demonstrate you've got lots of permeable paving, rain gardens, green roofs, blue-green roofs, things like that, then we can say, can we relax that 24-hour half-empty time? You know, we've done all of this other amazing stuff that you want in your borough, and normally we get then, yeah, fine, that's fine, you're doing some amazing stuff here. That's exactly the kind of SuDS we want. We're happy to relax that very kind of minor requirement.
Okay, yeah, because we couldn't even find anyone to design a swale. It's I don't know how widespread sort of SuDS knowledge is among the landscape profession.
There is a huge knowledge vacuum. Yeah, amongst the landscape profession, there's 2 landscape architects here that are kind of very proficient, but there aren't many landscape architects that have kind of cottoned onto this because it hasn't been presented as a design profession. It's been presented as purely about engineering. Now, our analogy is like buildings. They are not purely creative, they're not purely design, they're also not purely structural engineering. They're this amazing collaboration between these different disciplines to create something that works as a whole, but it works for people, it works for kind of energy and sustainability, but it works structurally is really, really important. But the structural engineering doesn't dictate terms. It doesn't lead to perverse outcomes of a building where you're banging your head on beams or you fall through holes or there's a big gap in the side and a load of energy sort of disappears out the building. That's what we see with SuDS. It's led by engineering and modelling, and we end up with perverse outcomes. We have with public spaces with fences around them or dangerous features in them. You know, it's leading to perverse outcomes because we've seen it as, oh, it's engineering. It's not. It's another functionality that we need to weave into something. You know, you're aware of this. You know, in development, with that master planning process weaves so many functionalities, needs and demands and policy requirements woven together into this whole. I've even got music to as I get impassioned. You know, and it should be seen like that. So yes, yeah. But the critical thing there might be the beauty of blue-green roofs is the water lands higher than the sewer. Almost always the water lands higher than a sewer. If we manage it up there, we can use gravity to get it to a sewer, and we can do everything we need to do, plus building energy benefits, biodiversity benefits, potentially immunity benefits, all sorts of cooling benefits. You know, I could go on. We'll probably, have we run out of time? One more. Could do a whole day of this.
Thank you so much for that. The photos of the terrible examples were so visceral. Like I could feel myself being there. Like, yeah. I think I kind of want to ask a bit of a partner question to the one behind me. Was in the Colchester, rather than why aren't we doing it, what enabled you to be able to do it in the Colchester example? Were there particular factors that kind of enabled that?
Yeah, it's not a conventional housing developer. So where we have tried to work with conventional housing developers, even though those that say they want to do better, what we find, I've found this for 20 or 30 years of my career, there's people kind of higher up the pyramid that say all the right things, but as you get closer to building on site and actually building on site, it kind of, it ends up kind of eroding away and it just becomes conventional. There's always this pressure to divert, just go back to what we always do. There's always this pressure to just default back to can we just do it like we normally do, please? And so we find it very, very difficult. So we've basically just given up with conventional housing developers. So we want to work with people, housing developments that share our ambition and passion, which things like co-housing typically align with that. They're interested in the environment, they're interested in being sustainable, they're interested in, both those co-housing projects, the residents look after the entire SuD system. Ordinary people manage the SuDs because it's landscape, it's just landscape with a few tweaks, you know. And people, organizations like housing associations, typically they have a higher ambition of the quality of landscape sustainability. You know, housing associations, typically they will have policies of people that live in their houses not being in fuel poverty. You know, you're genuinely committed to what life is like for people that are living in those developments. And so, you know, we've kind of got open doors to have these conversations. Now, the crazy thing is, all this, I mean, you know, what I've shown is, you know, maybe a kind of higher end, but you can do it a lot cheaper than that. Still do these integrated approaches, still look fantastic, still deliver on biodiversity and BNG, amenity benefits, not take up development land for SuDs, not cost anything in terms of taking up land. And the crazy thing is, for housing developers, if they just cottoned onto that, they could save a lot of money. But never, never, ever in the history of development has something come along where a government or government bodies are asking you to do something better for the wider environment, for people, and it's also going to save you money. But that is the reality of good integrated approaches to SuDs. The SuDs they're delivering is costing them money. And that's why they're lobbying against it. I could have put 10 houses on there. You can have your affordable housing or you can have your SuDs. The crazy thing is, if they do this and deliver all these benefits, it will also save them money. But I can see why that is hard to get your head around, because not many times in life does that sort of thing come along, does it? But genuinely, it's been proven through a number of individual projects and research projects, it is cheaper to do good SuDs than the kind of end-of-pipe solutions. But it's a lot more expensive to design. So if you want to save money at the beginning of the kind of like the design process, I could literally design you a tank for a development in 5 minutes. Whereas what we do takes months. So it costs more up front, but you save dividends later. Thank you. That's it from me, isn't it? Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Hello. Try and get the... Thank you. Well, hello everybody. I'm Stuart Edwards, working in Utilities, but I've also been working on the Enabling Water Smart Communities projects, and it's a bit of a hard act to follow after having Kevin and Matt up here, who've basically covered a lot of content and the killer point in my presentation, but never mind there. Come on. So I'm also got the last leg before yourselves and a break, so I'll be as expedient as possible. And anything with the term that I'm going to talk about, benefit cost analysis, sends people into a glazy eye storm. So I'm trying to make it as interesting and exciting as possible. But first of all, how many of you, can I have a show of hands, how many of you have heard of environment, enabling water smart communities? Oh, wow. There's quite a few. Fantastic. There's a link on there as well if you want to take a picture of it. There's loads of great documents out there at the moment. Certainly one that's influencing government at the moment. So it's a fantastic project that's been underway. Its main aim has been really to tackle the blockers for integrated water management, look at ways to get away, remove these blockers, and really make sure that we can have water smart communities that can facilitate
housing development and growth. There are a number of different organisations have been involved in the delivery of the project, and also we've got an independent programme board that's been set up to really govern and get the right deliverables and the right outcomes out from this. So it's been particularly successful. We're having our closing event next week, but that isn't the end of enabling water smart communities. It is going into a new phase of growth board with new projects on the back of that to take that forward. So some of the things we talk about here. So the reason for this and integrated water management is that the element that we're covering today is really about the sustainable urban drainage systems. So the sustainable drainage systems where water, better managing water where it falls, to correct some of the previous speakers and not get slapped. So we're here to really mention that enabling water smart communities really covered 2 projects under this. I'm going to talk to you today about one of them in particular, which is the cost benefit analysis. But there's also another piece of work that was done by Public First, who really looked at the public perceptions and the wider UK benefits of high quality SuDS. So, and Alastair, who's here today, will be talking to you later today about that one. But I'll go on to talk to you about the cost benefit analysis. So, high quality sustainable drainage systems. So we've been in a position where we've had SuDS for a bit, and we've just had presentations today talking to us about the SuDS that's come out on development sites. I'm here to talk to you about analysis that's been done to support new developments and what the outcomes are from that. So first and foremost, we had to go about with what are high quality SuDS, and what do we mean by low quality SuDS? Well, the focus of the work is obviously looking at the high quality SuDS because we want it to be better, don't we? We don't want the bomb craters and the kiddie climbing frames that aren't particularly health and safety conscious, do we? So we want the high quality SuDS, the integrated SuDS. But we had to define it first, our technical steering group. But we also had to define what we meant by low quality SuDS. And we defined low quality SuDS. If we think about the 4 pillars, the Serious SuDS manual, and the 4 pillars around water quality, water benefit, water quality, hydrological benefit, biodiversity, amenity, does it actually, what ticks those 4 pillars? It's the high quality SuDS that we're looking at to tick those 4 boxes. Low quality, usually just focus on, and as the previous presenters have touched on, it's usually just end of pipe solutions, very simple designs, end of pipe, mono asset design, very limited in terms of the actual wider benefits. There's no real effort to capture wider benefits as we've seen from those others. So I'm going to sort of talk you through a bit of the methodology and how we built this sustainable benefit cost assessment tool, what went into that and what we were considering. So we sort of came up there with the definition of high quality SuDS, which agreed with the technical steering group. Again, as I said, to meet the requirements of all 4 pillars of the CIWEM manual. The method that we went through, well, we did a review. Nothing surprising here. We did a review with the literature review. A lot of the stuff with industry best practice and SuDS is well documented there. There's a lot of stuff around, we did industry engagement, so we took a bit of a view of the literature, went through, did a review of that. Then took it through to an industry engagement to get through a questionnaire approach to really get the understanding from practitioners to sense check that with that. And then build it into a SuDS benefit cost assessment tool, which is a mathematical model for picking up all the costs that were fed in and also using the CIWEM best tool to raise the benefits and getting the 2 linked to give you a relative best benefit assessment. And of course, pumping out analysis of findings. So key findings of literature review. Well, like I said, we've had SuDS around for a while. There's a lot of stuff around, the national standards. There's been recent changes, as we've heard from previous presenters, about the standards that's come in there. Of course, they're all still guidance. They're not mandatory. Elements here, SuDS costs and benefits should be assessed through the whole life cycle. Of course they should. And what is really being done about the upfront assessment and the design of this and including these high quality SuDS considerations early on in the planning cycle. So the key findings from the questionnaires and interviews about the affordability, the value benefits of space and design considerations. So we went through a series of questionnaires and interviews a lot of the people and a lot of the engineering, when we break it down into the specialists we talk to developers who obviously focused on price production, getting the houses out. We've got the engineers who are out there amongst you who are focused on the design and meeting the standards, the landscape architects who are really focused about getting the sense of place. And what I found was working on this particular project was all these dynamic views and how controversial SuDS can be amongst the particular different groups. So about debating what is high quality SuDS and low quality SuDS and the individual pressures that was coming out on design and build. And I think the previous presenter was talking about as you go down the hierarchy, there's sort of people say, well, it sort of gets a bit watered down. What we were finding was people under pressure to move things forward quicker and quicker. It was almost getting too late in the process to really embed some of these incentives. A lot of these things need to be done earlier on. So these are the sorts of comments that we were getting back. And of course, when you're doing that, you're losing the value and benefits. The space is ending up being a bomb crater at the end of a site. It's not really being integrated. So a lot of the design considerations that are going on are focused on end of pipe. And this is what was, there wasn't a reluctance from the people that we talked to, design consultants, to engage with high quality SuDS. It's more that they felt they had barriers, whether it's guidance, whether it's understanding, but there's a real desire to move things forward. How benefit cost was analysed. So we import development details there, as you can see from the model. We took information from various costing tools. We looked at 130 sites to build up a costing system. We used SuDS best to assess the benefits. So we built this model, which had 600,000 iterations without going through all the cost benefit and all the other sort of model run information. We had 180 sites, 600,000 iterations. We went through a sensitivity testing exercise as well. We tested real outcomes and real sites to make sure that what we're getting out, the relative cost benefits were right and in the right order. Model findings. What we're getting was, and it's just been over because you stole my punchline really, the benefits that you're getting from high quality SuDS far and outweigh what you get for low quality SuDS. So the high quality SuDS situation is you're getting far more benefits from it. The actual nitty gritty of the costing elements, we didn't go into in huge amounts of detail that we need to focus on for relative pricing for particular jobs. But the benefits are so far and out large, it just shouted out how much we really need to look at high quality SuDS and how we need to move that forward. For residential sites, which is what EWS is focused on, and there was up to like 6 times the benefits. For commercial, you know, looking at 13 times the benefits. These sorts of benefits are not something that should be particularly ignored. Key insights, again, particularly beneficial, the high quality sort of high benefit. There wasn't much, there was discussion amongst the group and the technical input about the variances you might encounter through greenfield and brownfield. This was found to be negligible on the costing. And depending on development density, there was one element where there was potential opportunity for developers, and that was where, if we look at integrated SuDS, a high quality SuDS integrated, you've not got that, as we've seen on the pictures, that piece of land that's completely sterilised, that part of that site. It's integrated, so there's potential for more land, so there's potential benefit there for developers. So I was sort of saying, one of the things is what has always struggled, one of the elements that we think about in enabling what smart communities is the stewardship, and we're thinking about the stewardship of these particular assets. One of the things we think about, the developers are there, they're building the houses, they're putting in the ground, then they're moving on. So what were the benefits for them? The potential benefits are, and this again would need another piece of work to really explore what this would mean for them in great detail, but that the land take could be of benefit for them to have high quality SuDS. I think it touches what Kevin was saying earlier as well, that these high benefits are of benefit really to the home user, the society, the community, the sense of place, but the developer also gets an incentive as well to do this because of the land take. So you've got efficiency there around development value, but we need further work really to dig into developer side costings. The local authorities and all of this, there's a number of policies that local authorities touch on with respect to biodiversity, with respect to climate change. All of this interacts with the high quality SuDS, can help with this. I sort of think of it as we've got all these different checklists to go through, but if we follow a high quality SuDS approach right at the beginning, it would tick a number of these boxes and move it forward. So what next? I thought we touched on a number of things here. Early in the process, we need to have better communication. So there's communication and knowledge, because within the sector there's a bit of a void on high quality SuDS and what those mean and how we can do that. There's then also, when we're talking to communities, well, they don't recognise that. They don't recognise the benefit of what it is. If we showed them and explained it to them, the bomb crater actually having this next year, or as I call it, a bit of a Centre Parks approach, but I get told off for that, but more of a, you know, a greenery around you on your doorstep, I think they'll be highly attractive, and that'll probably link into what the public were thinking of. I don't want to say too much and steal Alastair's thunder later. So for me, I think there's also, my colleagues have previously touched on as well, consultations are out from DEFRA and MHCLG, and one of them is about land and about private estate management, and actually it really does touch on the point of stewardship, and it touches on, well, actually who should be managing this, because I think if we can get that clearer, that would help us. There's a number of points to touch on this as well, but having that clearer as well, having clearer guidance and making some of the guidance actually mandatory, dare I say, I think would move this forward quite a bit, because I think there's certainly appetite out there. It sounds like it's not too hard to do. The feedback I'm getting is it just seems to be a little bit cloudy at the minute on how to move forward. So that is my view. So thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions? There's a gentleman. Oh, go on. Yeah. Go on.
Just a quick one, really. So many of the properties and jobs we've seen thus far, to my eye, look very much like what we would in our industry call pseudo-public space, i.e. it's not truly public space. It's space that's managed by a maintenance firm or whoever, and all the rents and what have you pay for this service charge to maintain that. Yeah. So it's in their interest to keep it looking good. Yeah. The issue that I see all around London is when poor old local authorities with very restricted budgets are trying to maintain these SuDS areas. Are there any projects going on that can make it a lot easier, and maybe education of the public to adopt these spaces a lot more? Because I've noticed once they're adopted, the community gets it, there's no problem.
Right, that's interesting. I've seen a myriad of different situations around that. Some where communities have been struggling, or what's called resident management companies, who individuals have been set up with responsibilities and then struggle to understand what they are and struggle to implement it. I've seen situations where, in most cases, coming from the Competition and Markets Authority, about the automatic depiction and automatic selection in the planning policy and the planning conditions on a particular site to automatically fix for a particular resident and estate management company rather than a resident management company, which then reduces choice. When you talk about local authorities struggling, yes, obviously there's a number that have been not officially declared bankrupt, but are certainly struggling with budgets. I believe that situation hasn't changed or got much better. Local authorities are struggling. We know that certainly United Utilities, I was adoptions manager, I was training up my adoption team and engineers to be able to handle SuDS because of what I call the merry-go-round between, well, who's going to become the SuDS approving body? Is it going to be the local authority? Is it going to be the water company? And it seems to be doing that. And again, this is where I'm touching about having that clear guidance, who would be doing that. There's also touching on your point as well about the community and having that role. And with the higher quality SuDS, it means you can have better community involvement with that. If you've got something like that bomb crate, I dare say that the community members would not want to be maintaining that. And water companies, as we stand at the moment with the current adoption sector standards, then anything that sort of is acting as a sewer they maintain. They're not currently obliged under the Act to be cutting grass or anything like that or maintaining amenity space, but they are sort of maintaining the bit that operates like a surface collection point, a drainage system. But most companies have different views on that and have views on, well, should we be doing more? How do we do more? How do we encourage communities to engage in this? but also provide those opportunities, those wealth creation opportunities for local communities, but also can water companies do more to help protect, to help make sure the water is being managed properly where it falls, the rainwater where it falls.
Thank you very much. I have two questions. First one is very quick. Did your study cover retrofit and new build?
It didn't cover retrofit. Sorry if that wasn't clear. It was new build only.
Okay, that's understood. Thank you. I think some of the photos may have been retrofit, perhaps, but very good. And then I know a bit about the BEST tool. I wonder what the financial benefits were that really drove those benefits. I suspect it was property price and rental income. Is that true, or are there other big drivers?
In terms of the benefits to rental, I couldn't say off the top of my head on that. It was the WSP went through the detailed analysis, so I'm afraid I'm not an economist who could go through the specific details on that. I'm afraid. The costing elements are just now that the benefits clearly outweighed the cost, and that no matter what even if for example, the cost of the model were out by 100%, it didn't really change the outcome of the report because of the strength and the benefits that were reeled. Again, focusing on the benefits of Bray that was dealt with within Syria Best. Sorry, I can't really go much further on that. Any other questions? Go on.
Thanks very much. Really interesting. I was just wondering if you looked into whether those cost-benefit ratios are sensitive to changes in climate in the future, for example, or any other pressures on the water system like population growth, new water-intensive industries, that sort of thing. Does that kind of change the cost-benefit analysis in either direction?
We didn't factor that in at that point, but it's a good point. We have done this original piece of work to really gauge interest and move it forward with a view of potentially doing other pieces of work in a very specific area, and those sorts of points were recognised. But as ever, we work to a budget and what we can work to. But yeah, no, they're good points. Any other question? No. That's it. Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers. We now have a 20-minute break. We've got teas and coffees just outside, and then we'll be back in here for the final panel of the day. Thank you very much.
I have mentioned it as well. So there's a lot of work going on with enabling water smart communities. Please do have a look at what we're up to. We've got the exhibition upstairs as well. So this panel is part of that exhibition. And it's bringing together the practitioners, policymakers and industry leaders today that are exploring how the built environment must respond to increasing water-related challenges. So water resilience is becoming one of the defining issues for our towns and cities. Managing surface water, adapting to more intense rainfall and creating those healthier urban environments. These are all challenges that the built environment sector we've now got to address together. So as you've heard this afternoon, sustainable drainage systems, they're increasingly recognised as a key part of that solution. They allow us to manage rainfall more naturally, slow and store water, and integrate drainage with green infrastructure, biodiversity, and public space. In other words, SuDS are not just a technical drainage solution. Getting that one in there for you, Kevin. At their best, they are part of how we design better places. Places that are more resilient, more attractive, and better able to and I've lost all. Might have to shout. Oh, there we go. So the panel today, we're going to build on what you've already heard earlier today. Matt gave us a really compelling argument about managing water where it lands. You heard from Kevin about the effective case studies and less effective case studies of what works on the ground, and Stuart on the work that was commissioned by our project Enabling Water Smart Communities, looking at the economic case for high quality SuDS. So today we will begin this session. I will ask each of our panellists to come up and just do 10 minutes opening remarks, and then we'll move into a moderated discussion, and then I'll open up the floor to any questions that you may have. So today, just really quickly, we've got three experts who are joining us. We've got Sue Illman From Illman Young Landscape Design, Sue is an award-winning landscape architect and a long-standing advocate for integrating SuDS into high-quality placemaking and has extensive experience delivering schemes that combine drainage, biodiversity and community value. We've got Al Chisholm from CIWEM, and Al's a leading voice on water policy and environmental management, and he has been closely involved in shaping the national conversation on SuDS regulation and the future of water management in the UK. Finally, we've got Alex Nixon from Thames Water. Alex, as part of his job, works at the forefront of delivering large-scale SuDS and surface water management programmes. He brings his practical insight into how catchment-based approaches and partnership working can be implemented on the ground, and that's the focus for today. So without further ado, I will hand over to Sue for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And I've got the reverse problem that you had, is I haven't got my glasses. So I can see you all, but I've got no idea what I'm looking at down here. So you'll just have to forgive me. In the interval, I had a discussion with people, and I thought that what it might be useful, because clearly there are a number of people here who are not familiar with SuDS. So in that case, I thought it would just might be useful to you if I just explained what the different SuDS components are. And everybody else who knows all about it, just keep quiet even if I got it wrong, okay? So the first thing we want to talk about, I don't want to talk about, just mention, is there is such a thing called permeable paving. And that is a material that, of course, we can use as part of as a SuDS component. But going to the ones then that are perhaps the ones you may want to talk about. So swales, we've talked about those. We now understand what swales are, how big they are, what they do, that sort of thing. Then there are two sorts of basins we can use, one that's called a detention basin and one that's called a retention basin. So I think you can probably guess what they do. So detention will just hold it temporarily and then discharge it. A retention will probably hold some of that water for a period of time. Bioretention planters, they're much more interesting because those are going to be planted as well, and they can come in pretty much any shape or size that you like. We invariably see them as nice little rectangles all over the place, but there's plenty more that one can do with that, and Kevin's shown you quite a lot of things today, so I don't need to, because I'm sitting on the panel, not showing you pictures today. So the other thing is things like ponds and wetlands, and they're very useful, and they're sort of like, I always think of them as polar opposites, because ponds hold a lot of water, so they're managing good quantities of water, but they don't necessarily have much biodiversity attached to them, whereas with a wetland, it's not holding great quantities of water, but it's much more biodiverse. And I think wetlands in particular is something that isn't really used as a SuDS component very often, but I think it's a really interesting one that we should use more often. And that's those different components. So I hope that's useful to some of you here. So we're sort of talking about good and bad SuDS and what you have to do to get them right. And I think you've heard some really good examples of why and where they are good. If you're designing SuDS, then it's really important to understand the details of what they are and how they are to be used, because otherwise they're not going to function correctly. And I also think that working with the people who live in the area where these SuDS components are going to be constructed is a really important thing to do, to explain what they are, so that they understand the benefits that they generate and what they do in saving water and managing it on site. And just a little anecdote, which I've been told I'm allowed to tell, is I was working on a site next door to a developed site, and I just thought I'd have a wander around of it, because I could see that there were a few SuDS components there, but they did have a very strange sort of pondy thing at the front, which I really couldn't work out what it was. And so as I was walking around it, I saw this couple walking along with a dog, an elderly couple, and so I stopped them and said, "Can you just tell me what that is, please?" This thing that was there, this big circular depression. And I have to say, it's the most strangely constructed SuDS component I've ever seen, but it worked. Anyway, this couple, the gentleman there, he launched into a full-blooded lecture on what SuDS were all about, and that this was a detention basin. And I'm going, really? Can you? And does it? Oh, goodness me. Could you tell me a bit more? And it was absolutely a wonderful experience to have this elderly couple who totally engaged with the fact that this housing estate of about 40 houses had SuDS within it, and they absolutely got it. And that's where we want to be. I think I'll leave it having got to that point. No. Right.
Thanks, Sue. So I think Sue clearly didn't have any slides. I don't think Alex has. So I'm going to compensate for both of them with trying to rattle through essentially a full keynote slide deck worth in about 10 minutes. I'm going to talk to you about two things. Firstly, the other project from the amazing Enabling Water Smart Communities project. Did anybody talk about that before? Around the value of high quality SuDS. And the second bit around the kind of status of the policy and regulatory framework that may or may not exist to make this stuff happen more widely. On the project around the value of high quality SuDS, it was a piece of work done by Public First, a clever organisation who do things like public polling and economic modelling for the Enabling Water Smart Community projects. And it looked at three things. Firstly, developer perspectives on SuDS. Now, I think from comments made earlier, you'll get the impression that there's not always an amorous relationship between developers and SuDS. So we wanted to explore that a little bit more, do a little bit of economic modelling to try and work out what the value of these things are, both to the property owners and occupiers and to kind of wider UK economy. I don't know how that was done. I'm not an economist, it's all voodoo to me. Luckily, the report is on the EWSC website, and you can go and find it and find out how they did it. And then finally, they looked at public opinion, really to dig into things that Sue's just talked about in terms of what the public really thinks. So in terms of the developer perspectives, they do recognise that there are a wide range of necessary and important benefits, but they have certain bugbears around SuDS that they constantly wheel out. Generally relates to viability and site constraints, and that really comes out when you're talking about small sites particularly. However, one of the interesting things, given that they have had a history of lobbying against a more robust approach, is that they're really starting to argue about the need for something stronger, clearer, more consistent, because they're finding the disjointed nature of the regulatory frameworks and the fact that it varies across the country a little bit difficult to work with after, say, 15 years or so of experience of that. And they recognise that good SuDS improve saleability. They do question whether that then transfers into value and price impact. We'll touch on that later. They think buyers like SuDS, but they don't think that buyers generally, again, to Sue's point, really understand it. Most of them don't. A few of them do. In terms of the economic modelling, though, what were the headlines that came out of that? Well, basically, they looked at the benefits that could be achieved by incorporating good quality SuDS in the government's targeted 1.5 million homes, which they refuse to use as a figure. They like to use the OBR's 1.3 million homes. And what that showed, after they'd done all the voodoo, was that it would unlock around £247 million per year in benefit, mainly through amenity, a little bit through rainwater collection, and a little bit through air quality to the occupants and the residents of those 1.3 million homes. So that's not an inconsiderable amount of money year on year as a benefit. In terms of how the public value it, well, they like all of the things that well-designed multifunctional SuDS deliver. So they like good air quality, green space, amenity, wetlands, good landscaping. They even like permeable paving, apparently, according to this. So most of the individual benefits, they kind of rate above 50% in terms of, yes, we prefer them rather than don't prefer them or don't care about them. And then finally, in terms of the actual value of those good SuDS to residents, from the polling, from the in-depth, immersive research that Public First did, they went and had 70 interviews on 8 different new build housing estates in Cambridgeshire to really dig into the detail. They found from willingness to pay surveys that people would be willing to pay up to £281 per year more in terms of rent increases or service charge uplifts to achieve reduced flood risk, higher water quality and better communal green areas. And in terms of the actual price premium, looking across all different types of property, Public First calculated that there would be an average price premium for homes that had good SuDS compared to ones that had not good SuDS of £4,001. And if you extrapolate that across the 1.3 million new homes, and that unlocks an additional value to kind of the economy generally of £3.1 billion. So there is tangible, monetizable value associated with high quality SuDS. What of the regulatory and policy landscape that could enable those things more? Well, in January, we had a new water white paper, a new vision for water, and that started talking about pre-pipe solutions, which is another one of those techie terms that is going to drive Matt into his grave one day, unless we just start talking about managing rainwater better where it falls, and we have to do that. And what government has said is that it recognises the value of treating all of these challenges that we're facing with the climate change and pollution and so on and so forth far closer to source through pre-pipe pollution solutions, and it is committed to ensuring that the legislative frameworks, the funding streams, the regulatory staff and all that support the delivery of those. That's a really good statement and starting point. People who have worked in this arena for some time will know that there is a piece of legislation that will make this approach mandatory. It's existed for a long, long time, since 2010. Unfortunately, it just hasn't been commenced. The previous government finally, at the beginning of 2023, agreed that it would commence Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act by the end of 2024. We ended up getting on a little train of successive prime ministers and secretaries of state, and that got delayed. Then we had a general election, and now the current government, who were supportive of bringing this forward, when they got into power, decided to have a little look at the existing system and see if we could tweak that a little bit. And so that is where we are. We're almost certainly not going to see Schedule 3. We're probably going to have to just deal with an enhanced jigsaw of little planning-led bits. That starts with the National Planning Policy Framework, which is, as Matt said, has been recently updated and consulted on, and that requires SuDS to be incorporated in all new developments and done in accordance with the new national standards for sustainable development, which people have talked about already, so I'm not going to talk about. What isn't there at the moment is a clear mechanism for adoption and maintenance, and adoption and maintenance has been one of the hurdles historically to getting good stuff done and maintained for the long term. Well, so national standards, you know all about them now. The previous non-statutory standards were awful, 2 pages, ish, now 60 plus pages long, detailed, deal with the full SuDS train, have rainwater harvesting at the start, jolly good, we're all happy, give or take, apart from the pedants of the world. On adoption and maintenance, still no firm provisions for that, but a really interesting consultation has very recently closed, and it emerged from the Competition and Markets Authority's report on the house building market back in 2024. And as a result of that, the Housing Minister really recognised that the current situation with private estate management companies is far from optimal, and the way in which public amenities, including SuDS, are delivered is not good enough. The way in which they're looked after is not good enough, and these companies often charge far too much for basically not doing anything. And probably in terms of the quality of what would be delivered and the quality of how it would be maintained, that would be likely to be better if it was delivered by a public body. Points around the cost of doing that we will touch on in a second. The consultation examined, amongst other things, mandatory adoption and adoption by public bodies, removing barriers and improving the process which govern it. So, There are other things as well. Building regulations. These will just layer on additional levels of kind of quality to the, or pressure in the regulatory system to drive better outcomes. We have had consultation on Part G of the building regs last year, which looked at water efficiency and things like rainwater harvesting and water reuse. And there's probably going to be a follow-on consultation coming out of that. And then next year we anticipate a consultation on Part H of the building regs, which deals with drainage and waste disposal, so the other bits of SuDS. So more little regulatory components to ratchet up the pressure there. We basically wanted to look at, within CIWEM, whether it would be possible to essentially secure very similar outcomes to what Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act could achieve, but through this kind of cobbled together multitude of components under the planning-led approach. Can it achieve well-designed, adoptable and maintainable SuDS? Can we do it in ways that align with existing legislative frameworks so that they will be familiar to developers, familiar to planners, and really reduce the argument that a mandatory approach is really burdensome? And will it work for new build as well as retrofit? We reckon yes, probably. And really very, very simply, in terms of the mechanisms that could govern SuDS approval and adoption, there is a process which is Section 38 of the Highways Act 1980, which governs highway adoption in new developments if they're going to be adopted by public bodies. And that safeguards the delivery through a financially bonded process and ends with an approval against the design standards, which is the standards for the roads and bridges, and that's the one. Thank you. Basically, you mirror that process, but you use the national SuDS standards as your technical guidance, and pretty much you have a robust enough process to drive what comes before to be delivered to a good enough standard to ensure that it will happen. That could come about as a result of that MHCLG consultation on the private estate management companies. The final little piece of the jigsaw, we think, is the cost of maintenance, and that's been mentioned again. This is generally done through things like commuted sums, Section 106 agreements. Those are not university loves. They're regarded by developers as quite expensive, and they tend to put the burden of paying for this stuff onto the people who occupy homes in the earlier years of their lifespan. It's not fully equitable from that point of view. There is actually an existing mechanism that pays for surface water drainage year on year, and it's the surface water drainage charge component of your water bill. Most people don't know it exists, but nationally, on average, between about 40 and 60 pounds per annum goes to pay for surface water drainage. Now, in theory, that could be paid across, or a proportion of it, to an adopting body to pay for the adoption and maintenance, or to pay for the long-term maintenance. The problem is the quantum. At the moment, it's nowhere near enough to maintain SuDS. And so we bring you back to that £281 willingness to pay. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to cost £281 to maintain per property to maintain the SuDS associated with that. If you look at Enfield, they reckon it costs about £100 a year to maintain your average rain garden. So we're talking about maybe double that charge. One way or another, good SuDS are going to have to be paid for in terms of their maintenance. We talk about all the benefits that can be unlocked through it. I'm not sure how politically appealing putting it on water bills will be, but one way or another, we're going to have to find an attractive way of paying for it. So, very rapidly, there is a monetisable value in good SuDS. SuDS are still being delivered inconsistently. They're not being adopted well, and they're not being well maintained. A legislative approach, i.e. Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act, is very, very unlikely to happen. We've got a good policy headline in the Water White Paper with the pre-pipe stuff and managing rainwater better. And probably, if the government puts the right level of ambition through all of these consultations that are coming through, a combination of improvements across the planning-led approach could pretty much unlock the same kind of outcomes as can be achieved through Schedule 3. What we really need to unlock now is the funding arrangements for long-term maintenance. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Al, for that tough act to follow. Hi, everyone. So I was going to take a slightly different angle. I was going to talk about what I call our 7-point plan, or amusingly, the Resilient 7, which is basically our plan for how we're going to manage surface water flooding in London. So I'm going to briefly talk about each of the points, but then bring them back to SuDS and locate them on that. So number one is help communities at high flood risk become more flood resilient. What is certain is we will have more floods in the future before the decades it's going to take to make London appropriately flood resilient. So we've got to help those people who are at highest risk help themselves. So we've been funding the National Flood Forum together with the 10th Regional Flood and Coastal Committee and 11 boroughs to set up 14 community flood action groups. So these are communities who were badly flooded in the 2021 floods and for whom there is no easy or quick solution to their flood risk. So effectively, we've been empowering these communities to help them help themselves. They've also been informing our plans and the respective boroughs' plans as well. Now, what is key from that is they have become absolute SuDS champions. You know, some of them are absolutely passionate, and they are far better advocates of flooding than perhaps your local friendly water company is at the moment. You know, they are able to advocate for things like depaving, rainwater harvesting, etc. So we are finding them very powerful drivers to ourselves and to their respective boroughs and to the local business improvement districts in how to have more SuDS. The second point is about ensuring drains are operating to their design standard. This is fully or mostly in our court. We've got to make sure that our drains are able to drain away the surface water that they can. However, there is a complex interaction with the local authority or the highways authority who maintain the top bit, the gully part of the drain. So we need to work closely with them to make sure that our sewers can drain that water away, but that water's got to be able to get into our sewer in the first place. So we are doing a lot of work about targeted sewer cleaning, working with communities where there's lots of fats and oils and greases going into the sewers to try and make sure those sewers are as good as they can be. The third one is about going back to those properties at high risk, where they are at risk of being flooded from a sewer connection. So the sewer overflows underground into normally a basement flat or a basement level of a house, is trying to work out who are those properties at highest flood risk, who has experienced repeated flooding, and installing non-return valves to make sure that our sewers don't empty into those properties. And we've had a program of installing those for several decades now. However, it is important to note that if you put a non-return valve, sometimes that can increase the flood risk to that property if there is a lot of water running off that property trying to come out of the sewer. So we have been working with these people to say, well, you may want to put a rainwater storage butt to absorb some of that water to delay that going into the sewer. Then the fourth one is the main one, is reducing the rate and volume of rainwater trying to enter the system. Our sewers could never deal with the volume of rain that we experienced in July 2021. You know, it was in some places upwards of a 1 in a 200-year event. No drainage channel in the world could probably deal with that. You know, so we've got to recognize that. And one of the things that we've been saying for a long time now is that we need a landscape scale SuDS in London to be able to take the strain off the drains. Our drainage and wastewater management plan that we published in 2023 advocated that we need to disconnect 7,000 hectares of currently impermeable surface to SuDS by 2050. Now, that's 10,500 football pitches. That is a phenomenal landscape change in London. And you know, at the moment, I think in a good year, we probably deliver collectively, we, boroughs, TfL, GLA, Thames Water, deliver maybe 3 hectares. So it's going to take upwards of 1,000 years to hit that target with the current rate of delivery. So we need a massive step change in how to do that. And a couple of things that have happened recently that are starting to advocate that. The first thing is we've been doing, so with the EA and the GLA, is SuDS opportunity modelling. So we know that 60% of the benefit of SuDS in terms of flood risk reduction can be brought by putting SuDS in the most 5% effective areas. So it isn't just about SuDS everywhere, even though that would be nice. If you can put them in the best locations, you can get the biggest bang for your buck. Now, that figure came from the modelling of 6 boroughs. Since then, we've modelled the whole of London. So we now have a map of London that tells you where are the best places to have SuDS. And what we hope that that will do is it'll flip from this sort of opportunistic way of SuDS of, oh, look, let's put one here, to where do we really need them? Where is the most effective location? Where is that land cover change happening? And it forces us to ask that question, can we put a SuD in there? Or what is the impact of not putting a SuD in there? because that will then force us to then adopt a more expensive measure like sewer upsizing or storm tanks. The other thing we've been working on with the GLA is something called the Suds Through Streetworks market. Now this is, I think, hopefully you will agree, a minor bit of genius. So on an average year, 186,000 holes are dug in London for streetworks. So utility companies such as mine, gas, energy, data, dig holes in London to maintain and upgrade their networks. 186,000 holes. Now we're struggling to deliver SuDS, and the main, some of the highest costs of delivering a SuD is getting permission to dig a hole and digging a hole. And yet we have 186,000 of these. So the GLA did some quick modeling of that, and they found that about 87,000 of those holes could be in areas upstream of high flood risk areas. So what we've said to ourselves is, why don't we try and persuade the people digging those holes, where it is appropriate, to put back a SuD rather than the pavement or the road that was there before. And we think this could create a step change in the delivery of SuDS. So we put a bid into Ofwat. Ofwat funded us to create this market. The idea is the market would be kind of like a speed dating between buyers of people who want SuDS and sellers, people who are digging holes. And we are very excited about this. We put a second bid into Ofwat, we should hear in May, to see if we can then trial this market at scale. So we would try it across 15 boroughs in London. So 5, getting there. Take a catchment-based approach to managing surface water. Having 33 independent flood risk plans for London isn't working. After the 2021 floods, the first things that everyone did was run around and have a what happened wash up. And all these roundtables were convened, and they all came back with 2 key messages. Number 1, we can't do this alone. You need to bring everyone together. And number 2, we can't cope with the amount of rain trying to get into our drains. We need to slow it down and therefore driving SuDS. So this led to the creation of something called Flood Ready London, which is a partnership that brings together all of the key players who have a responsibility or strategic interest in surface water flooding. And that led to the production of the London Surface Water Strategy, which cuts London up into its 10 surface water catchments. So finally we have boroughs and partners working at a hydrological sensible level, not pretending that their flooding stops at the borough boundary and it's someone else's problem or becomes their problem only when it gets to their borough boundary. So we have this, and we have funded 2 of the 10 catchments to become priority catchments, and they are developing catchment action plans. And those catchment action plans are designed to identify the strategic projects that will for that catchment. And collectively, we've raised 3.725 million to deliver the first tranche of those projects. So there will be potentially, you didn't hear it from me, but announcements coming out possibly later this week on that. 6 is about tactical increases in sewer capacity. We cannot do this by green infrastructure alone. We recognise that, but it is horribly expensive to build new grey infrastructure into the existing urban realm, particularly where you're retrofitting it. We're looking at a storm tank in South London to protect the community. The kind of figures we're looking at is 30 to 40 million. If it wasn't for London house prices, it probably wouldn't be worth doing it. But, that is the sort of order of magnitude. So we've got to look at what are the opportunities for grey infrastructure upgrades to parallel this massive green landscape improvement. And then my 7th one is about ensuring that new development contributes to reducing flood risk. So, we've got to look at new development going beyond greenfield runoff rates, where it is possible, and where looking at potentially co-funding mechanisms to ensure that new development not only just doesn't create any runoff, but potentially it absorbs more than its net share. So I'll leave that there. Some nodding, some frowning faces. Looking forward to question time. Thank you.
Okay, if Al, Sue and Alex, you would like to join me up on stage, we'll have a little bit of an open discussion between the 3 of you guys. It's a big stage. Thank you. So we'll just start with a little discussion here. We've got a few questions that I've pulled together for you all. Just reach out to Al first. You discussed the white water paper, which suggests a shift towards pre-pipe solutions. How can we ensure that policy changes translate into practical and on-the-ground improvement in how SuDS are designed, adopted and maintained?
I think the white paper is kind of the North Star for pulling all of those different components that I talked about together. I think we can, as I said, I think we can forget about, you know, a legislative approach. I don't think that's going to happen. And so what really needs to happen is when there are consultations on things like the building regs, when there are consultations on things like the standards that have to be met in order for public amenities to be adopted and then funded for maintenance. Government needs to be bold against that overarching headline in the Water White Paper about putting in place the legislative and regulatory landscape to enable pre-pipe solutions. Government needs to be bold on each of these different components to make up for the lack of a legal mandatory approach. It's already said that SuDS need to be included in all developments. Back in the day, it was major developments only. And now it is all developments. We have those improved SuDS standards, significantly improved SuDS standards. And Kevin made the point, you know, I think if those standards had existed 10 years ago, the sector, the skills base within the sector, the mentality, the thought process, just the general philosophy for how we do things now at this point in time would have had 10 years of growth. People point to Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act and it being commenced in Wales. It was not an easy journey for a lot of authorities in Wales. It was quite a painful teething process, and I think that's still going on. And there's been a lot of lessons identified and what have you. It's not a silver bullet at all, and a lot of it comes down to the attitudes and the perceptions and the skill sets in the engineering community as much as the legislative piece. So the legislative or the regulatory piece. The regulatory piece is important, but also it's knowledge, it's awareness, it's good training, which CIWEM are doing some on SuDS retrofit, particularly. There's a whole raft of things that need to have quite a while to bed in and translate through into a different way of working.
Thank you, Al. Alex, did you have any comments on that? I could see you making some.
I would just say, Water White Paper was superficially great. We're looking forward to the transition plan that explains how it's all going to happen, and clearly that transition plan needs to happen soon if we want to try and integrate any of that into the next round of price reviews. For how water companies formulate their 5-year business plans. So yes, it's all, I think, all very positive. But I'd love to see you to scratch below the surface and see what's really going to happen now.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you both. I'm going to come to you now, Sue. I've got a bit of a provocation question for you, actually. So we spoke about this earlier. So we were talking about the difference between the visibility and the subtlety of SuDS. So one of the things here that we were talking about was that if it's a drainage solution, it tends to be kind of hidden in plain sight, so we don't necessarily interact with it as people in our communities. So do you think that we should actually continue with that subtle integration, or should we actively promote and highlight the importance and the benefits?
I think you should highlight the importance and the benefits because you need people to actually respect them, because if they don't understand what they're looking at, then they don't know what to do with it. So, and you can see that quite often, that things that have been implemented sometimes do deteriorate just because those maintaining them have got absolutely no idea what to do with them. And that sort of communication between the construction side and the management side is not always as good as it might be. So I think, there's that risk that things will get degraded. Not that we're trying to hide them, because actually I think if you're designing these things properly, they should be adding benefits to what you're looking at and making it attractive places to live, work and play. So, it's important that we get it right, but it's essential that we get the management and maintenance of it right as well. And, that needs to be, throughout whatever we're doing. Absolutely. But, otherwise there's no point doing it in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. Did either of you, Alex or Al, have anything to comment on that? I think the lead into the maintenance question, I think, is a really good segue, actually, if you've got any thoughts on that.
So yeah, I think we've got to see SuDS as critical infrastructure and manage them according to that, because particularly if I use my budget to pay for new SuDS, we have a surface water management program. We funded 75 SuDS projects in the last 5 years, and I think if we're spending that money, customers' money on something, you rightly want to know it's going to work, because that's money that's then not spent on some grey infrastructure solution. And therefore, we've got to have confidence that it is going to operate and work for at least 20 years, and that the funding that we are paying to the commuter sum for maintenance is going to be used properly. And one of the things I've joked about is potentially in London, do we need something like TRIFL, a strategic organisation that manages the surface water network in a way that the SuDS and so on are going to be properly looked after, and is able to attract the green financing to enable us to deliver the scale of projects we need. At the moment, the funding for SuDS is very difficult to make. Particularly if you want to leverage different forms of funding, air quality, biodiversity net gain, flood risk, whatever it may be. None of those funding streams align. And if we could say that we have a pipeline of thousands of projects providing demonstrable benefit, providing efficiencies to the economy, to insurance, etc., we could then create a green financing proposal that could be quite attractive. And if that was linked back to a proper management organisation, maybe that might just work.
Great response there. Thank you. Al, I wondered whether you might want to come on to this, because I think there was the public consultation that were responded to recently about management and maintenance.
Yeah, so, I think the headlines in that, certainly as regards to SuDS, the headlines in that consultation very much relate to the need for SuDS to be well designed and delivered in order to enable their relatively easy maintenance. And I guess the kind of approaches that Kevin described, the maintenance of those integrated into development SuDS components should be a lot easier for communities or your average kind of contractor to maintain than some of the big bomb craters with some of the more heavy components to them. I think from what Alex was saying, I think there is maybe amongst government and agencies, there is a shift in thinking now. If you look at some of the funding formulas that relate to flood risk management, there has now become, or there is now greater emphasis on treating these distributed interventions like SuDS as programs and enabling them to get funded as programs of interventions rather than an emphasis on a single big flood wall or what have you. And whilst that doesn't relate, that relates to kind of capital delivery of the schemes, it's the mentality shift of how you're thinking about these things. You're thinking about a whole load of distributed interventions as a scheme. And that can feed through into the importance that we put on maintaining these things, as Alex says, as critical infrastructure rather than little individual rain gardens in a street that, they're tiny, so they don't really need much.
Thank you, Al. Sue, I wondered whether you had any thoughts on that as well, about maybe from the design perspective on, I think that mentioned earlier was about the hierarchy and what's easy, and taking that as the first step. So from a maintenance perspective and an engagement perspective, do you consider that from the design phase?
I think it's essential that you do consider the design and maintenance together, because you need to know that, that you need to actually make that system that you're designing something that it is easy to maintain in the first place. You can have some things that are very complex and therefore quite demanding in terms of that maintenance. But there are so many good schemes now that really show how they can be put together, that it ought to be easy for people to do it. But you do still sometimes see some howlers every now and then, you know, where people haven't really understood the detail. And I think once you understand the detail of how these things are put together, then actually it becomes an easy process to do. And that should give people confidence then to actually do it, because we do need, you know, the design world to engage with this. I mean, clearly those of us landscape architects are going to say, of course, we're the only people that should do this, which, you know, doesn't happen. But I do actually think it is a collaboration in working. When I'm doing SuDS construction and design, I work with a chap called Steve Wilson, who's a hydrological and geotechnical engineer, whenever we have the opportunity to work together, because we need those two disciplines to work together. And therefore, what you get out of that is something that should be robust, maintainable, and all of the things we want it to be. And when you start to see things that are falling apart, then all that does is give it a bad name. And in these still, I have to say, early stages, we don't need that happening. So, you know, those who are not familiar with it, do some training courses, you know, get to know what it's all about at the detailed level. And then that maintenance and management becomes an easy thing to deliver.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, sometimes the hydrology of SuDS is quite subtle. So there were two SuDS features that were installed just around my corner. I was beaming with pride, beautiful little rain gardens. Then my borough, other boroughs are also available, repaved the road and directed the flow away from the SuDS. We then had the hot summer last year, and the buses drove over the new repaved road, squeezed up the tarmac to completely prevent any water going into this SuDS. And so, you know, where are we going to be retrofitting SuDS into the public realm? We need to be aware of these subtleties. You know, there's another example from another colleague in a borough was telling me about. They put in a speed control sleeping policeman that effectively prevented all the SuDS, all the water draining to the SuD. So the SuDS need to be integrated into our traffic management system. Now, we are funding projects as part of the SuDS through Streetworks where, you know, we co-funded 3 projects where I think it was UK Power Networks and Southern Gas were putting in a main, and they've built the SuD on top of it. But we need to make sure that that's somehow geo-fenced in a GIS system. So when someone comes to repave the road, there's a warning saying, oi, don't go do this because you're going to stop the SuD working. And that's another bit of the culture we need to be driving. They need to be seen as integrated into the urban fabric, not these little standalone jewels.
Yeah, that's a really important point, actually. I think, so we have seen several examples of where things haven't necessarily worked so well. So I think it might be a really good opportunity to talk about something that worked really, really well.
I mean, I'll go back to the SuDS through Streetworks market, because I think that is a game changer. You know, this concept of utility companies putting forward their 5-10-year forward Streetworks plans, we all pool them into one GIS database, and that provokes a discussion. It says, oh, look, Thames, you're planning to dig there in 6 months, and UK Power Networks, they're planning to dig there in 12 months. Wouldn't it be annoying for people if we went and just dug up the road, repaved it, and then dug it up and repaved it again? Why don't you work together? And then we say to ourselves, well, that's interesting. That community downstream is at high flood risk. We've been struggling to get SuDS into that area. What would it take for you, UK Power Networks, if you're the one digging up the road last, what would it take for you to put that back as a SuD? How much would it cost you to do that? And then the buyer, which could be us or the local authority, would say, well, how much would it cost us to want, you know, what do we want to pay in order for that SuD to happen? And what we've got is this clever bit of Nobel Prize-winning economic maths called the Lindsay market mechanism that essentially tries to broker the two. So if we, Thames, are willing to spend, say, £600 per square metre to do that, and the utility company digging the hole says, we're only going to charge £400, what that market mechanism does is it matches it at £500. So we get something cheaper than we would have been prepared to pay, and the utility gets a little bit extra above their base costs. And the idea that that market will then drive this ambition for people to actively source SuDS where they are, you know, where the opportunities lie. So we move from this passive, reactive, if you like, approach to positively looking for SuDS where they're most needed. And my sort of dream is that the market will actually then be able to be applied to any land cover. So if you are a local authority wanting to repave a playground, or you are a housing estate manager re-roofing it, you would be able to trade that land cover surface change on the market and see who would be willing to put, downpipe disconnection in, or rainwater harvesting or something like that. So we, whilst we might prove it on the most difficult thing, trying to, do utility works in London, we could then open up the market for any potential land cover change. So as a community, you may say, hey, there's 50 of us on our street. We're prepared to, all have a rainwater butt. How much will you pay me in order to have that? And I think this is an exciting moment.
No, that definitely does sound very exciting. Thank you for sharing that. I wonder, Sue, if you've got any suggestions of some good SuDS that you have done. If you've got some good case studies that you might want to refer to.
It's funny, over the years I've done so many now. I'm trying to think of one in particular that, well, I think a more recent one, just because it sort of encapsulates the whole approach to how you can retrofit. So we've been working with Anglian Water and, the people here, and just doing fairly simple retrofit on a site where it has just continuously flooded. And with some research, we found out that there used to be a little stream running down the street, and they built houses all over it. And so every time it rained, it was in the depression, and the poor people that were sitting there had their houses flooded every time when there was an extreme event. But in doing that, so clearly we had to address that, and I'm really big on community consultation events, because I think if you're going into an area and you're looking to change the character of that landscape by redesigning part of it to integrate the SuDS, then you need to actually inform the public and explain to them what you're doing, why you're doing, and what it's going to achieve for them. And I find that when you go to these events, people come in and you can have boards up with loads of text telling them what it's going to be. But the most important thing that we tend to do is have some videos that explain it nice and simply. And what you get is the kids watch it because it's done as a bit of a cartoon. And then because the kids are watching it, the parents come over and have a look. And then you get people understanding it. So for me, the first one that we did and did it in that way, I think it just showed that the way you communicate with people to get them to understand what this is all about and engage with it and be happy for it to be integrated into their environment is a really important thing to do. And so, I would definitely advocate that we do it, and that is taking that sort of approach.
Yeah, I love that response, Sue. I think that really speaks to something that Matt mentioned earlier about the language that we use as well, making it clear. And making it so that it's easily understandable to everybody who interacts with that. So I think on that note, I think I would like to open up the floor to any questions.
Hi, hello, thank you for the presentation. I have a question regarding storm critical design and what considerations. We always criticize government or etc. And perhaps the government is where have a duty of action, but in scenarios where a storm can go almost in an hour 3 times above of the storm criteria we go through, how and what's the relationship of all we went through, and what considerations we should take as designers on that matter. To all of you.
Should I kick off with that? So my concern is that quite often we burn so much of the SuDS project on budget on design. So some of the projects we've been funding recently, we upwards of third to a half of the budget went on design. And so one of the things we've been looking at through the SuDS through Streetworks is, can we design, come up with some design standards? So simple templates where you can replicate again and again and again. So the example we looked at was New York have been installing rain gardens to reduce sewer overflows into their rivers. And the first thing they did was they said, right, we've got to stop all this sort of bespoke design for every single project because it's chewing the budget. What we want to do is we want to standardize the design. So we come up with a standard rain garden, 10 meters by 2 meters. And they've got it to the point now where they turn up, they angle grind the square, the rectangle, get a vacuum truck, suck everything out. They can build the SUD for about, I think they've reduced the cost by about 300%. So phenomenal ability to do that. Now, there is always going to be place for the carefully designed SUD that needs to be bespoke for that area. But my argument is we've almost got to stop spending so much money on the design, start modularizing if we want to start delivering at scale. If we want to make serious inroads in the flood risk where we know we're at the moment and we know is going to increase, we need to be spending more on delivery and less on design.
Brilliant, thank you. Does that answer? We lost the, oh, there.
And my question is, and this is probably lack of knowledge, is so when you're getting the utilities to instate permeable paving after they've dug the road up, don't the highways people get very excited about loading and all that sort of thing? I just remember coming up against that. I mean, it was probably about 10 years ago, so maybe things have changed since then.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got to make sure that it's the appropriate kind of SUD for the appropriate location. So don't go put a street tree in the middle of the highway sort of thing. So that's what we're looking at, these 5 design typologies. Yeah. I think it depends. Yes, you are correct. I can't quote what it is now, but certainly that has become part of the standardized design, and the designs may be changed for the type of location. So, I think the standard sort of thing in London is we assume it's got to be able to take a bin lorry, being able to turn on a certain turning circle, and that's what we've been using for looking at the design of the features where we're putting them in a non-main road. I mean, clearly you're not going to put in a TfL red route. We wouldn't be putting a SUD in that, but if it's in, if it's on a pavement, if it's on a side street, if it's on a cul-de-sac, you can adapt your design for that.
If you're doing stuff at scale, if you're doing stuff at scale, why wouldn't I just remember that the permeable paving manufacturers didn't meet the so-called standard that the highways, I'm going to say it's the Highways Agency. But could the permeable paving manufacturers meet the highways engineering standards so that those major routes in that Transport for London, the TLR, basically the TLRN, can do? I mean, are people developing materials that can meet the standard that is required on the TLRN, for instance?
I don't know. Good question.
Yeah.
One for the audience. Yes, wonderful. Thank you.
There we go. Brilliant. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, gentleman here.
Thank you. Alastair gave us a very graphic account of the planning instruments, the standards, all the complexity, the clunkiness of it all. Why aren't we looking at incentives? In Germany, presentation from a couple of weeks ago from Lutz, in Germany, when they split the tariff and no longer had the wastewater tariff directly related to the freshwater tariff, but instead the wastewater tariff is related to the surface area of the property, this gave an enormous kickstart to SuDS, and it's an inbuilt incentive. It doesn't require legislation and enforcement. It's an economic instrument to try and stimulate the whole sector, which apparently in Germany has been very effective.
Yeah, so the whole concept of sort of area-based charging for sort of drainage area is something that water companies have looked at. I think are there 4 of the water and sewage companies, or 3 that have some component but it is for non-household because I mentioned the quantum of the average surface water drainage charge, if you try adding in incentives to a charge that is, what, £40–50 per year, it's not really adding up to much meaningful. I don't know how that is all structured in countries like Germany. I think it is probably structured in a way that means that will have more cut through. Whether or not there is appetite amongst the government and the water regulators to look at pretty wholesale restructure of essentially the structure of bills, I don't know. I would guess, given what a political hot potato water bills are and how far we've gone around the whole water review cycle without that coming up as an option that government wants to take forward, I don't think it's something that we're going to see anytime soon. But Alex, you're more embedded in all of this from a water company point of view. So
certainly something we've toyed with, and I think it makes incredible sense on particularly on non-residential development. So we've got some very large sheds, storage sheds, supermarkets, out of town shopping centres, etc., who sometimes their drainage is based upon the diameter of their supply pipe. So it's ridiculous. 10,000 square meters of impermeable area, and the drainage charge is based upon how much water they use for their staff toilets and the kitchens, and that is just bonkers. So I think, I quite like your idea, and it's something we've toyed with. Is if you had a long-term plan, say over 30 years, start working with the big sheds with the impermeable car parks, and gradually end up with the Scouts hut or whatever. You gave people enough warning, and you had an incentivization fund to enable people to make those changes. I think that could be quite efficient, but it feels like in some areas it's a really tough sell. As Al said, it wasn't part of the new vision for water white paper stuff. So, but I think it's a very attractive idea.
Thank you. So we've got several questions, actually. Yeah, we've got a little bit of time.
Thank you. I was just building upon that. One of the things I understand was a few years ago there was legislation change within planning that you had to have planning permission if you wanted to change your own, at a property level, to change your drive into something that was non-permeable. And it's just not being, there's no teeth to that legislation. But that would have made, if it was policed, a huge difference. And I wonder if what you just spoke about there, Alex, would help with that, and whether that could even be managed. I mean, you're talking about trying to do it at a business level. There's some, what can we do about that aspect of it? Because it seems to me, really strong what we heard this morning. It's about managing it and disaggregating the solutions and the responsibility.
So I believe that is starting to change. I've been in some pretty fractious, heated public meetings, but one of the things that's come out is, one of the quick things we could possibly do, local authorities could do, is start to police that loss of permeable paving in the area in the front garden. Yes, there's a complex rule. It has to be no more than, I think it's 5 square meters, or you need planning permission. You need planning permission to drop the curb, and so on. And that has become quite a political issue. Certainly, we've seen it in some boroughs. It's really become quite a hot issue. I went to a particular community in East London where they were sort of, gnashing their teeth about, why did we flood? And I said, well, the reason you flooded is you've paved your front garden more than my bathroom. You've dropped the curb, and the highest point of the land is the top of the camber, and the lowest point is your kitchen. So where do you think all that water is going to go? And they're at the bottom of a very flashy catchment. So they are receiving not only their own water, but everyone uphill of them. And that has really led to a political, one councillor has made it his defining election issue. So, we're starting to see it happen, but, local authorities are very stretched. And when they're looking at planning applications, they worry about fire and disability access and other things, and flooding, unfortunately, is way, way down at the moment.
Thank you.
But planning system is the only gateway at the moment for flooding, for any control of flooding, isn't it? And that is the problem.
We're starting to see insurance blight in some very, very rich areas of London where people, unfortunately, asset-rich, cash-poor people, I think they're now unable to get affordable insurance. They're looking at £50,000 excess, so they're potentially one flood away from bankruptcy if they can get the insurance for flood risk anyway. So again, it's become quite a political issue because it's going to be, you're going to start to see blight potentially in some areas, and that really starts to focus political minds.
Thank you. So questions over here?
My question is about new build, and the question is, why are we not hearing more about property level SuDS for new build when we know that that reduces adoption problems, management company fees, reduces or eliminates rainwater drainage charges, provides larger property gardens, greater ownership. We also know from experience in Germany that that also increases rainwater use at property level, which of course reduces water bills, and also your sewage bill, which is based on your water bill, and has lower carbon costs. So my question is, why are we not hearing more about property level SuDS for new build, do you think?
Okay. Al, do you want to take that one?
A very simple answer. I don't know. But I think my guess would be in new build, most of the time, particularly if you're talking about larger schemes, the mentality is you're doing things at scale, and so you'll do it at a site scale. And I think that's part of the inbuilt logic. It certainly is the case in retrofit and extensions and that kind of thing. So again, I think there is a part of this is regulatory, part of it is just cultural mindsets. And as the whole designer mindset shifts more to a Kevin Barton view of the world, to, one of the bomb craters in the corner of a big development perspective, then that does, feed more into thinking about things at the property level, I guess. But I'm just kind of speculating. I think we like to do things in as centralised a way as possible. That is part of the British psyche, and that's a journey we've all got to go on, I think.
Depends on the developer, because if you've got a developer that's got their module as to how they build their houses and what they do with them, we can integrate the SuDS in terms of the open space, but getting them to integrate it, particularly coming back to the building and looking at the whole holistically, one would say loads of them just don't do it. And you can't make them at the end of the day, because if they're providing the drainage that's required in the area, then they're doing what they're supposed to do. But they're not taking it to that level, which I think is a great shame.
Thank you. We have time for another question? Yep.
Just going to say in relation to that, Matt, we're finding a lot of LLFAs are not liking the idea of within curtilage SuDS because they don't have any control over it. Long term, how do you stop Mrs. Smith taking out her downpipe planter or paving over her permeable paving with tarmac? So it's often been a bit of a problem at the local authority level. I don't know if that helps at all.
Okay.
But if you're retrofitting, then you shouldn't be having that problem, because you are going to quite often do that within the property, and it's quite more likely that, and people want to do it, and those that do want to do it will do that. Yeah, and take care of it.
Question over. Yeah, I think that we've got one more question over here, or response.
With a micro SuDS design tool. It'd be worth having a look at. Literally just launched over the last couple of months, and that is to try and attract household level SuDS interventions that incorporate rainwater reuse as well. Oh, sorry, I know you don't like it, reuse. Rainwater harvesting. It has not been used before, therefore it is not reuse.
All right, brilliant. Thank you. We have time for one more. Go on then, John.
It's not a question. I just want to give a bit more detail about some of the challenges. So Mansfield retrofit, Severn Trent Mansfield, was mostly around turning back urban creep, most of it allowed by or enabled by local authorities. I'm working with one of my two local authorities, I won't mention, that they incentivise drop curb applications ahead of resurfacing. by making it a cheaper application. So, and we are all siloed in thinking, and that's one of the things I've got to sort of break down. We're all siloed in our thinking, and I think, yes, it'll be really interesting to see how much the industry is able to do retrofit on private property this AMP, but it is massively challenging, and most people won't care. Even in bathing water areas, it will be something we'll be exploring. And the final thing is, Severn Trent does have surface water charges for non-households. Even where they are in place, and they try to do much more SuDS retrofit, the costs are irrelevant in comparison to the capital required to deliver. So they were having to offset over and above the cost for surface water charges that the companies saved. So there are massive structural challenges, but we're having fun doing it. But I really want to be interesting to explore what the companies can do financially, though, because I think we could do more and be more consistent without any legislative change. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that final thought, John. So I just wanted to bring this panel to a close. I do have one final question that I want to ask each of our panellists, and we'll start with Al. If there's one thing you could leave this audience with, what's your final thought or your call to action?
Lobby your local MP to get maintenance requirements, adoption and maintenance requirements made far more robust. I think that, to me, is the way of getting quasi-mandatory SuDS approaches through. It's on that back end approval, adoption bit of the whole regulatory kind of framework.
Good thought. And Sue?
I think actually, if we could try and make sure that these things were done properly, because you do see some nightmares, and that's just depressing, and it also gives SuDS a bad name, and we really don't need that. So yeah, I'd just like to see things done properly and maintained.
There we go. Lovely. And Alex?
Be a SuDS advocate. Practice what you preach. Do something on your own property and talk about it. Become a real pub bore on SuDS. If you're not already.
Yeah, and be that people that that Sue bumped
be the
into.
You want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. You can hold that. So just bring this to a close. I just want to share my final thoughts from today. So I think thank you so much. That's been a really super interesting discussion. So what I got from that was, I think that there's this the importance of working at those different scales. So from that catchment level through to those targeted interventions. So Alex, you mentioned that 5% of areas will have 60% of the benefit. So I think it's really key about the place that we choose to do these. We've heard from Al that the policy is moving in the right direction. It's focusing more on managing water at source, but there's still that gap between ambition and what's consistently delivered. So again, Sue, it's about making it work right, and the long-term maintenance of that. We don't want them hidden away. So done well, they become part of the places that people actually enjoy. It makes it greener and healthier and a more livable space. It's not just about drainage. And finally, that big one, and I think that you touched on this just now, Alex, is people. So if we bring our communities with us early so that they understand and value and become advocates for SuDS, it's absolutely key. We all need to work together. It's that systems approach. It's not just any one person working on it, it's all of us collectively. It's that combination that we're building together of strong growing evidence, and we're seeing more of it happening on the ground. But what we also need to do is address those challenges, be open about what works and what doesn't, so that we don't keep repeating those same mistakes, so that we can continually improve. Ultimately, it's that combination of evidence, collaboration, and honesty that will make SuDS that cornerstone of a more resilient and sustainable urban place. So thank you. Thank you to Al, Sue, and Alex for your invaluable insights. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for joining in this conversation, and a big thank you to the Building Centre for organising and bringing us all together. That's it.